welcome to episode 10 of Deep Weird. I'm Jacob Pittman, and today's series of interviews is a little bit different in that I know everyone who we are going to be hearing from today, and in some cases I've known them for over 20 years. We are going to be talking about some activity that happened in a house that we all more or less grew up in. At the time, we never really thought about it or paid very much attention to it or talked about it at all, but years later, we started to notice that there were some pretty interesting patterns, and I thought it was interesting enough to put on the show. There's going to be a lot more names and a lot more characters to follow in this episode, so I'm going to give you a primer on the many names that you will be hearing. This story takes place in the childhood home of my friends Justin and Michael. We've known each other for over 20 years, and the fourth lifelong friend of that group is someone named Curtis, who will be interviewed for this episode. Ryan will also be interviewed for this episode and is Michael's cousin, and you will intermittently hear the name Brandon. Brandon is Michael and Justin's other brother who did not grow up in the house. And finally, you might hear the name Mike, who is the guy who actually owned the house. So with all that out of the way, now that you know what's coming, let's get into the first interview, which is with my friend Curtis.
All right, so my name's Curtis. I've known Jacob and the other people that we're talking about in this story for over 20 years. I'm a property manager in a town in Washington. I'm going to say it was probably Christmas 2001, which would put me at a spry 12 years old. Michael and Justin, I believe, were still sharing a room, and Brandon had the room across the hall from them. They had one of those bunk beds that was kind of staggered, where like the top bunk was a twin and then the bottom bunk was like a full or a queen or whatever. So we could fit multiple dudes on the bottom and one guy on the top. So we must have been, I'm guessing it was probably Christmas break, and I had gotten like the GameCube for Christmas, and this was probably around like one of the first times that I had ever met Justin, Michael, and Brandon. Justin and I knew each other from school, and we were hanging out. So I was coming over to probably stay the night for Christmas break. I had met Michael, like I said, like coming in the house, and at some point I met Brandon. We were just like hanging out, having a good holiday break, playing GameCube, playing some Sonic Adventure, and I think I had probably been there for a couple of days because I know at the point in which the story actually happens, I knew who Brandon was. So Michael, Justin, and I are all three sleeping in Michael and Justin's room on the bunk beds. And have you ever like woken up in the middle of the night at a new place and you're just like, oh, where am I? Like, what?
Yeah, you forget where you are for a second.
Yeah. So,
especially when you're younger, that happens a lot.
Exactly. And this room only has one window, and it was usually like partially covered by a blanket or a sleeping bag that they had hung over it. After a hard night of playing Sonic Adventure, we all went to bed, and I woke up and just could not figure out where I was because their bunk bed was like pressed up against a wall, and I was facing it, so like the room was almost pitch black. So I take a few minutes, figure out where the hell I'm at, like get oriented, and then I like move over so that I can actually see the room. And as I flip over and I'm like starting to see the room come into view from the light coming in the window, there is just like a solid black figure looming over the bottom bunk bed, like probably almost eye level with where the mattress would start at the next bunk bed. And I was trying to figure out why their brother was standing over us in the middle of the night. So I literally like am sitting there trying to figure out what the hell he's doing, and I'm finally just like, Brandon. And I think like he's sleepwalking. So I like reached out and was like, Brandon, what are you doing? And like went to go and touch him, and then I realized that it wasn't him because my eyes are starting to come into focus more. And I don't specifically remember like what happened or how like the situation resolved. I think maybe Justin woke up or Michael woke up or something happened and then it was just like gone. Because I don't remember like laying in bed fearing for my life or like spending a whole lot of time like trying to figure out what was happening. I just remember distinctly seeing something looming over me, staring at it, thinking that it was an actual person, and then I'm not really sure what happened from there other than it was gone.
That in a vacuum wouldn't be very weird because people wake up in the middle of the night half asleep and see like shadows and stuff all the time. So I think this is why we never really put this together for years, is because everybody has their own really small experience that isn't really worth bringing up, but then when you bring all of them up together, it starts to make a pattern.
I will say, obviously, that's happened to me before where you just wake up and think you see something and panic for like a second. But I was probably up for like a good few minutes trying to figure out what the hell was going on.
Yeah, you're like having a coherent
Yeah.
conversation and we're fully
Yeah.
awake. Yeah. Let's fast forward a long time to when you are in your, I think, what was it? You were in your 30s at this point living in the house,
Yeah,
right?
well, it was probably, I want to say 2015 or 16 or 17, like around there. So I wasn't quite in my 30s yet, but I was like 27, 28, maybe 29, because we lost the house in 2015, and that's when I moved like into their house and rented a room.
So now you are renting the room that you originally saw this figure
Yeah.
in 15 years later or something like that. I actually don't remember any of the details of this part, so I'm going to be more or less hearing this story pretty much for the first time.
At this point, it is me, Michael, and then his cousin Ryan, who are all staying at the house. Now, Michael and Ryan don't live there full time, they have an apartment, but we're all working at the same place in our town. And they live about 30 to 45 minutes away from where we work. So it's just easier for them to stay there during the summer because we're caterers and it's busy. So we're literally working like 6 days a week up to 12 or more hours a day. So it's the three of us all living there. We all have our separate bedrooms. Like I was renting Michael's old room. So he wasn't living in that one. He was actually living in the room that Brandon was in during the original story. And then in the hallway between those two rooms is where Ryan's room was. So Michael's room, the room that I am currently renting, has this like giant walk-in like closet that is about 3/4 height and slants down with a roof as you go in it. And I was kind of using that as storage / like game area because I had just moved out of a full house and had to compress my life into like a single room. So it's literally got no door on it, no anything. And I don't know what it was, but at night, like my bed was across the room from it, and it would just be super eerie. And once in a while, I would feel like something was watching me from it, or even like kind of get a hint of something standing in it, to the point where even though my stuff was in there still, like I didn't need access to it at all times. So I closed it off with a bookcase in front of it. And after I closed the closet off, I literally had no problem sleeping there. Like I didn't feel anything anymore. I didn't see anything.
You're the one who finds the name Peter in the closet, right?
In this closet, when everyone was still kids and living in that house, it was literally just trash. Like they would throw broken dressers, broken TVs, like those old bunk beds that I was talking about, those were stuffed in there along with the mattresses. Like there was no reason for us to ever go in there, and if there was, it was completely filled with garbage. So I think that when I was clearing all that out to get ready to use it as storage, and if I remember correctly, this is actually what happened, I find the name Peter written on the boards inside of the closet.
And then our friend Michael informs us, hey, you know what's fucked up about that? Is that when I was a little kid, I had an imaginary friend named Peter.
I lived in that house, I want to say up until like right at the beginning of COVID. I want like 2020. I think the landlord finally decided that he was going to sell it. And I found out after like doing a little bit of research and talking to some people that that house was an old bunkhouse for all of the loggers in that town because it was on a lake where like the train would come through and they were, constantly like moving. So like all of these guys would stay in that place, which made sense after realizing why the layout of the house was so weird and jank, and like why there was doors that were just removed in places that there didn't need to be. Like there used to be doors on the living room and there used to be doors on like the stairway and stuff.
Yeah, because they probably had it set up to where the living room and kitchen was like a big common area, and then everything else was probably divided into bedrooms. This part of the story is kind of like where the Peter legend originates. After we find the name, we put a name to this thing. It's kind of this running joke of like, haha, Peter. Then Michael and Ryan have kind of an interesting experience with it, and I'm going to interview both of them. And I'll put in my finger on the scale here with the name thing. I actually can't remember if... I think you're right and you did find the name. Because I remember you had to clear out that whole closet when you moved in there. But a separate version of the story that is in my head for some reason was that Michael's mom was cleaning it out and found the name. And then was like, hey, isn't this weird? Do you remember your imaginary friend Peter?
Yeah, once you like reminded me of that, I don't know if it was just like a shared weird hallucination we both had. The second you said that, I was like, shit, did I actually like make this up or...
And then the last thing that I wanted to get in your interview is once you were moving out of the house, the landlord kind of sold it out from under the guy who was renting it. And he had moved out and cleared everything out, and you were in the process of clearing everything out, and the entire house was completely empty except for what little was left in your room. And then you started hearing weird shit again.
I was renting from Michael and Justin's dad. Is just like, I'm renting the upstairs, like helping him out with his share of the rent because the house was fairly big and he was in there by himself, and it was just like a good situation for both of us where I basically had 3 rooms to myself upstairs and he had the entire downstairs because at this point they had moved back to their apartment and weren't in the house anymore. So the landlord during COVID decided that like he wanted out and just sold the house, and it sold like immediately because that's just how things were going at that time. So I think we had like a full month to get out. Well, their dad just hired movers, and they came in, packed everything, loaded up into a big truck, and went on their way. So I was still staying there because I was just moving on my own. So I was packing stuff, taking a load to a storage unit, whatever. So at this point, it's literally just me, and I think I'm just in my bedroom upstairs. Like, the 2 other upstairs bedrooms are empty, and the downstairs is completely empty, like absolutely nothing. All the movers came, got everything. I was still staying there, and I was starting to kind of just get freaked out because I know the house is empty, I know the doors are locked, but I'm hearing things going on downstairs. Like, I wouldn't say slams, but like loud enough to where I can hear them and I know that they're actually happening, and just like not the house settling.
Well, and me and you had been in and out of that house and staying there on the weekends and all sorts of stuff for like 15 years or more at this point. So we would have been used to like the type of sounds that the house makes.
Also, the house that I grew up in was like fairly sketchy as far as like paranormal stuff happening. So I'm already like semi used to it, and it takes a lot to get me riled up to where I'm like, this is freaking me out. And it got bad enough at the house where I actually text Jacob and was like, "Hey, can you come over and hang out? I can't like be here by myself."
Yeah, I remember that. I remember going because I was trying to remember the reason why I went there because I specifically remember going there and seeing like the entire hollowed out downstairs. When you were hearing bumps, like, is it just like bumps on the floor? Did it sound like footsteps or like somebody moving furniture around, or like what did it sound like?
It was just like, I want to say it sounded like kind of people close, like something you would hear like if the house was silent and somebody like closed a cupboard in the kitchen, or like opened a door and closed it gently. It wasn't, like I said, loud, but it was loud enough for me to be able to hear it. It was just like stuff going on downstairs where it sounded like there was activity when there shouldn't have been.
All right, we are about to enter into the second out of 3 interviews. Curtis's interview sets up a lot of stuff and provokes a lot of questions. Next, we've got Ryan, who is going to tell his side of a very, very bizarre story, and that's going to set up even more questions and concerns, and those will finally resolve in our third interview. But first, here's Ryan.
My name's Ryan. Right now, I'm actually working as a sonographer. I've been doing that for about a year and a half now and liking it. But my story takes place actually when I was doing catering with my uncle and my cousin. Just to kind of kick it off, we never really had much contact with that side of the family. So my uncle had lived in Louisiana for a long time. So that's across the country for us. So we never really saw him. And then when they did finally move back up here, we maybe saw them maybe once every 4 or 5 years. And it's just usually when we're like visiting our grandparents or they're coming down to visit. So not too much contact. So we didn't really know too much about each other. So I ended up going up to Western for college, and my uncle got me a job doing this catering gig. And so I was living with them during the summer. And it's this old beat down house, just about falling apart, had rats living on the walls. But there's a lot of stories of kind of some weird stuff that go on in there, like weird sounds, hearing kind of voices or people like running up and down the stairs, even though there wasn't anyone there. I had never really had an encounter like that before. So basically what was happening with me was I just, out of the blue, out of nowhere, just randomly, about halfway through the summer, I just started waking up in the middle of the night, kind of like a lucid dream where I couldn't really move, but I just see someone standing at the end of my bed. And it wouldn't last long. I ended up falling back asleep probably within a couple of minutes, 3, 4, or 5 minutes, and didn't really think anything of it. Just kind of started writing it off like, just like a lucid dream. You kind of hear stories of like the old hag or the old woman sitting on your chest in those. So never had that. It was always just that random person standing at the end of the bed, but they would never say anything. So like I said, I didn't really think anything of it, kept on brushing it off. But like little things would happen that's like, oh, this is a little more than just like a dream. So one night I was sleeping on my stomach, and it was during the summer, so it's hot, so I had my shirt off and the window was open. And I woke up during like one of these lucid dreams. So I could feel the blanket kind of start sliding down the bed, like off my back. And I could feel it more too, because when the wind would blow in, I could feel the wind on my back, where the blanket had kept on moving down. And so I woke up, didn't think anything of it. I thought maybe, the blanket kind of just fell off the bottom of the bed, would kind of slide down. But when I woke up and looked at the bottom of the bed, the blanket was still on the bed and was bunched up. Like someone had been kind of pulling it down and bunching up at the bottom of the bed versus it falling off the bed and sliding down. So that kind of freaked me out a little bit, because that felt like it was actually someone doing it versus just something random happening. So, like I said, it happened about 2 times a week. Usually, it seemed like it would happen on like a Tuesday and a Thursday for whatever reason. Don't know why those days are significant, but didn't really tell anyone about it. And every time it would happen, I just wouldn't get that good of sleep. It just kind of be kind of jarring or whatever. I would not have a good night's sleep. It kind of just ruined my whole REM sleep. And so I'd always be fatigued the next day. And so it started becoming like frustrating whenever this would happen, because I just would wake up just tired, and you start getting like a little annoyed with that. So one of the nights that happened, I woke up standing at the end of my bed, and I was just finally like, okay, who the fuck are you? And he tells me his name's Peter. I'm like, okay, that has no significance to me at all. And then I ask him, what do you want? And he turns and looks at my cousin's room. And I'm like, okay, that's really fucking weird. Went to bed, Woke up, didn't tell anyone about it, didn't think anything of it. And it happened a couple nights later, did the same exact thing. What's your name? Peter. What do you want? And he looked at my cousin's room. Probably like the third or fourth time of this happening, I finally just got pissed off. I'm like, then fucking leave me alone and go bother him. And after that, I never saw him again. But it was like a week later, me and my cousin are driving in the car, and he's kind of just in a bad mood. And he kind of like snaps at me, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird, but whatever. And then he ends up apologizing. He's like, sorry, my mom just brought up kind of like a personal story from when I was younger that's kind of embarrassing, and it kind of just bothered me. And so I'm like, oh, like, what's the story? And so he's a little hesitant at first, but then he finally tells me, he's like, yeah, we were cleaning out the closet, like attic space, and on the wall in crayon is the name Peter written in crayon, like a little kid's handwriting on the wall. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, when I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Peter. And I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And so I told him what I was having, those dreams, and he thought I was messing with him. I'm like, no, I'm serious. I was actually seeing this person. He told me his name was Peter, and whenever I asked what he wanted, he'd look at your room. And so he kind of got freaked out by it. But ever since I told him to basically fuck off and leave me alone and to go bother him, I never saw him again. And as far as I know, Michael never saw him. But it was just kind of like there's like too many coincidences happening that was more than just like couldn't just like write it off.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that you got like verbal confirmation. I thought that you and Michael had talked about it, and then he told you about Peter like as a bit, and then you're the one who like gave that name to it. I did not know the part of the story that the ghost, I guess, is the one who tells you its name before you even knew the name. That's insane. Yeah. I know that I've heard this story before, but I did not remember that specific detail.
And like I said, it's one of those things. So like growing up, we never really talked or saw each other that much, and obviously, like that's not a story he's going to tell me. Like, hey, I had an imaginary friend.
And this
or
also helps solve part of the story that we've all been trying to remember is who found the name in the closet. We had one version of it that was Curtis found the name in the closet. He was kind of thinking that he found it, and then the other version of the story was that Michael's mom found it. But we couldn't remember, because we know that after we heard the story, we went and we're like, no fucking way, and went and found it in the closet. So we couldn't remember which one happened first, if his mom found it or if Curtis found it. So this is another one in the pile of, it sounds like his mom found it first.
Yes. Yeah, as far as I know, that's what it was when they were cleaning out that. It's because almost like wasn't a full-on closet space, because those rooms are up almost like in the attic where they're added on.
Yeah,
so it's almost like an attic crawl space versus a closet.
Yeah, they were weird. I would definitely say they were closets, but the way that the house was built, they were slanted down immediately, so they narrowed down into an attic crawl space.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a little bit after that too. I think I did every once in a while hear if it sounded like someone was running on the stairs or walking on the stairs whenever I was home alone. Like I had a day off and everyone else was working. But during those days, if that happened, or I heard that, I'd just get in my car and leave. I was not sticking around to find out whatever was there.
Next up, we have the third and final interview with Michael. This interview is really going to answer a lot of questions. It's really going to straighten out the timeline. And Michael is also going to fill us in on something that I honestly had completely forgotten about, which is the haunted strobe light incident that happened in the house. And if you don't know what a strobe light is, it's one of those lights that you see in Halloween haunted houses or clubs where it flashes at a really fast rate of speed and makes everything around you move in this weird stuttery pattern. Now that you've all been educated on types of lighting, here's Michael.
So yeah, we were staying at my dad's house, grew up in my dad's house, and it was just easy for us to commute from there during the summer to our catering job. Now, I don't remember how we got on the subject of it, but Ryan tells me, I've just been having these fucked up dreams, and I asked oh, what's going on? We'd make some stupid joke back and forth. It's I don't know, but something keeps bothering me, and it keeps freaking me out. It feels like I'm awake. And every time, it's 2:30, 3 in the morning, and I just get this feeling that something's there. And so I ask it, what the fuck do you want? And he tells me, it just looks towards my room. Kind of leaves it at that. And really, I got a little unsettled because obviously ghosts scare me and I'm a sensitive little guy. And I kind of asked, like, anything else happen? Anything, did like say anything to you? And he tells me, no, but all I really got from it is that it just looked in your direction. And I tried to ask it its name, like, what are you? And he says, Peter, or something like that. And I said, cool. That's fucked up. And then I revealed to Ryan that I had a childhood imaginary friend named Peter that I would take on car rides. We would play chess or checkers, whatever board game we had lying around. It wasn't uncommon for my mom to walk into like my room and just see me playing board games, what looked like by myself. And so I revealed that to Ryan, and it just kind of fizzled out from there. I think we both kind of got creeped out and just kind of stopped just because of how weird that could be, how breaching into a paranormal existence sort of started to become. I think we just kind of ended the conversation there. I think we may have joked back and forth more, but ultimately what it came down to is Ryan tells me this entity just kept bothering him night after night. He couldn't sleep, having a hard time even moving, like you said, sleep paralysis. And he's able to finally utter the words, "What do you want?" And he looks in my direction. Not Ryan, but the figure. And then it's revealed to Ryan by the entity that its name is Peter. And that's really my side of the Ryan issue.
The only real reason that I asked you to tell your side of the story on that is that the reveal that he was getting the name Peter from this, I guess, like shadow person before he even knew about the name was so insane that I honestly thought that he was like misremembering that, or that was like that part was exaggerated. But it's insane that according to you also that's exactly how it happened.
No, because that's exactly how Ryan presented it to me. It was like I got to be honest, like obviously I was embarrassed to have an imaginary friend. That kind of comes up later, but I'm 32, almost 33 now, and I understand kids are kids, but hit me when I'm 25 and ask me if I have an imaginary friend, we're getting into fisticuffs. Because it just was something that, for a while, I was just kind of ashamed of. Because I think most people who had an imaginary friend are going to feel that same sentiment. Like, they don't want to tell people, oh yeah, I used to create friends out of nothing because I was bored or lonely. I wasn't ready to explain to everybody that I met, like, oh, I had an imaginary friend named Peter or anything like that. So it wasn't something I just explained. Ryan just came to me, told me the story about the entity, said he finally got it to explain its name or what it wanted. And then from there, Ryan tells me, and I drop the bombshell on him, like, oh, by the way, I used to have an imaginary friend named Peter in this house. Good luck. He's probably going to get you.
So, from your perspective, and obviously you might not like remember it that well because you were a kid, but from your perspective now, the Peter character was 100% an imaginary friend, like fully. Like you obviously don't have any like memories of like literally seeing something or like actually talking something to something that was like talking back or anything like that. It was fully an imaginary friend as far as you're aware.
As far as I'm aware, right? Like I don't have this image in my head of someone sitting across from me or these words spoken between me and my imaginary friend. It was sort of purely vibes based, to kind of put it. Like if we were playing a game, I was the one speaking, not that something else is speaking to me. But I wasn't playing a voice for Peter or anything. It was just this sort of non-communication. But my mom would tell me that I would speak to Peter, I would talk to Peter, and I would respond to Peter. But I still consider that to be like an internalized thing. It wasn't, like I can't recall what Peter was saying. I can't recall what Peter looked like, other than just another little boy, right? But as far as I could tell you, and as far as I would like it to remain, it was an imaginary friend. Whether or not it was some entity, I think you could put together enough stories to have a sort of conjuring, but whether or not Peter is like a little boy in that house that I interacted with, I don't know how true that would be.
So, this is another mystery that we're kind of trying to solve, is that we don't remember who found the name first. And my theory and my remembering of the story was that it was your mom that found the name first.
It was certainly my mom who found the name first. And she's doing the mom thing. It's like me and a couple of us were hanging out in our kitchen, and she's messing with you, or not messing with you, but messing with me, saying something along the lines of like, oh, like your little friend Peter that you used to have. And I said, shut up, Mom. And then she says, I'm still mad that you guys used to just wreck the house or, mess up the house. And I still remember her saying specifically, when I was trying to find Christmas decorations to put up, the other week, I saw written on the ceiling, Peter, and I know one of your little asses did it. And I said, Mom, I can promise you I did not write Peter's name anywhere in the house. At least I have no recollection of doing so. And if you went back, because I went back, I said, Mom, point me in the direction of where this is written, because this is scaring me. And she points in the crawl space, and I see it written on the slanted ceiling of like our dead space. And a little kid's handwriting, the name Peter. But you could match that up letter for letter, and it doesn't match my handwriting or my brother's, because if anything, they would just make fun of me about Peter. They wouldn't write his name on the ceiling. So my mom is the one who pointed out finding his name thinking it was me because it was my imaginary friend, but letter for letter, that penmanship would not match mine at any age.
Well, and also the thing that me and Curtis talked about is the age when you usually have an imaginary friend is not really the age where you're coherently like reading and writing and correctly spelling words and stuff.
Right. I think I was probably between the ages of 4 and I would say the latest that I had that imaginary friend still was probably 6, maybe 7 at the latest.
Yeah, so you're getting into like barely even really being in school.
And I could read by the time I was in kindergarten, but my penmanship was terrible. I mean, my G's were literally just circles with a hook on the bottom of them, and most of my letters were backwards. And this was a handwriting that suggested someone had the ability to actually write and have penmanship.
Okay, I'm just now kind of putting it together. So I think what happened was you told us at some point that story about your mom finding it in the closet. Then Curtis moved into that room and went in there to look for it just as a goof and found it when he was cleaning out that closet. And he started to get like bad vibes from the closet and blocked it off with a bookshelf. And then after that, I think is when the story with Ryan happened. And he didn't know about any of this stuff beforehand.
Oh yeah, he wouldn't have been able to even get in that crawl space because it was blocked off.
We talk a lot in some other episodes about how a lot of people seem to sort of accidentally create a haunting without realizing that they're doing it. And I think this might potentially be a really good example of that, because if you look at like the instructions on how to basically like manifest a ghost or manifest a haunting, it's the first 2 or 3 steps will include the following 2 things. 1 is choose a name for the thing you're trying to manifest, and 2 is to talk to it seriously as if it's a real person already. And those 2 things are exactly what little kids do when they're creating an imaginary friend. So they're already accidentally walking backwards into the 2 first things that you're supposed to do if you look up anything about manifesting a haunting or a tulpa.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention is a tulpa. Isn't that specifically like a spiritual connection through Buddhism to bring life to something you believe in? I don't know
if it's Buddhism specifically. I think it's specific to Tibetan Buddhism, and if I had to guess, my guess would be that it was part of some sort of Tibetan indigenous religion before it was a Buddhist thing, or if it, because I don't think that the other sects of Buddhism have that specifically. That would be my guess, but I don't know for sure on that. But I do know that it only is specific to Tibetan Buddhism and not any of the other ones, as far as I know.
And I don't know how much speculation you want to throw on the stories here. I mean, just the pure reality of it could be, a shared story. I had an imaginary friend. Curtis found out about it because he's been a lifelong friend and, probably joked about it in the past. And it's a sensitive subject for me because having an imaginary friend felt like at the time, I don't want to say loser behavior, but that's what it felt like. So there's a shame appointed to it. Now, as for Ryan, he's my cousin, so at some point it's possible he could have heard, but I mean, my family's not really close with each other. I didn't even really get to know Ryan until I was 22, 23.
Yeah, he talks in his part of the interview about how he didn't even really see your side of the family very often until you guys moved back over here, and even then it was like once every couple of years or something.
Yeah, I mean, moving from Louisiana to Washington, we saw each other for maybe once a year. If that, maybe once a year, up until me and Ryan moved in together in like 2013 or 2014, we moved up to Bellingham. So if we're talking about like what we want to bring it down to its base parts of reality, Curtis is a lifelong friend. I had an imaginary friend, sensitive subject. He probably made fun of me for it in a nice, gentle, ribbing way that friends do. Ryan may have heard something here or there, but ultimately, there's so many parts disconnected. And if I were to speculate, I mean, I had times in that house where I never felt like I was alone. And it wasn't creepy all that often, but it never felt like I was actually by myself. I always felt like something was either peering through a window, something over my shoulder. There was not a lot of time in that house spent where I felt like, yes, I'm truly alone. I don't have to worry about anything. It always felt like something was there.
Yeah, well, and there's so many separate people having separate stuff happen to them that we didn't even realize until later. Like, I remember, so I've got my experience that I'm going to talk about in the discussion portion. And then you've got what you just said, plus the Ryan thing. And then Ryan obviously has his side of the Ryan thing. Curtis has the shadow person encounter when he was like 12 in that room. And then after that, getting so freaked out about the closet that he blocked it off. And then even after that, when the downstairs was empty, he could hear people like walking around and opening and closing the cupboards in the kitchen when nobody was down there. And Ryan also talked about hearing footsteps a lot of the time. And then even when we were talking about this on social media, I specifically remember there's a couple people that commented on the thing that were people that had also spent a lot of time in the house that were like, oh, that's weird. Did that happen to you guys? So it seems like we've got like, I don't know, 5 accounts of people that were all getting a weird vibe and all hearing weird sounds, and nobody ever really like brought it up until years and years and years later.
And my question to you is, have you brought up the absolute nightmare fuel that was the strobe light?
We've not talked about the strobe light, but my feeling on the strobe light now as an adult is that was probably just faulty electronics. I know that there are allegations that it did go off one time when it was unplugged, but I honestly don't remember that night well enough to know if that like actually happened or if we were just freaking out. I don't know for sure.
That's because you motherfuckers didn't sleep with that in your room every night. Guess who did? And guess what happened?
Okay.
Multiple times.
Okay. Then if that is the case, then you need to tell your side of the story on the haunted strobe light, because I'll give the audience a little bit of a primer. So when we were like, me and Michael were probably like 13 or 14, which would have meant that Curtis and Justin were like 16 to 17. And at one point, somebody, I think it was Curtis, had brought over a strobe light that he had, and it started flashing when it was turned off, and it would just randomly start going without anybody turning it on. and it was real spooky. And the rumor had been that it would turn on when it was unplugged, and you're about to clear up that rumor, apparently.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've mentioned this multiple times to you guys in person, but specifically, let's talk about like the first time it happened. Not the unplugged part, but just the misfiring of the strobe light. I lived in a shitty old house. Like, it wasn't constructed very well, but it wasn't derelict, but it wasn't constructed well. So faulty wiring certainly could be the culprit, but one of the first times it went off without prompting or turning it on, it's a Friday night, we're watching anime on Adult Swim, we're doing dumb shit as kids, hitting each other with pillows, or just beating each other and making food or whatever. Now we all go downstairs, and Curtis goes around the corner to go up the stairs, and he just sees it flash. And he says, "What the fuck, who's up there?" Comes back into the kitchen, we're all in there still, and he says, "Who's upstairs?" "No one's upstairs." "Did someone leave the strobe light on?" "No." He goes, "Oh, it just went off by itself."
I think I remember this night because one of the most vivid memories of the strobe light incidents that I have is coming around the corner and looking up the stairs and seeing the green light like flashing intermittently at the top of the stairs.
And not even at a rate of like strobe setting. It would just go tick, 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 just like randomly. Not like in intervals that would make sense for it to be turned on.
Which is why...
Just misfiring.
And that kind of behavior from electronics is exactly what you would expect it with some kind of like a fault in the electronics, but you're saying that it would go off in your room without even being plugged in at all.
Yeah, so what we used to do when everyone would stay over on the weekends, we would play with a strobe light and we would move it to my room because we would all sleep in the blue room or whatever, the room across the hall, Justin's room. So we would move it out of there so it just wouldn't freak us out at night. We'd unplug it, throw it in my room. One particular night I remember was right on a school night, going to bed. I go to sleep. I wake up around 2 a.m. and I just felt it. Something I just heard just go. I go, okay. My house had rats. I'm thinking maybe it's a rat. So I'm looking around, make sure none of those little buggers are like on my bed. As I'm looking around trying to figure out what woke me up, it just flashes. It's got the stupid green film over it. And I immediately go into panic mode because my worst fears are coming true. It's 2 a.m, the witching hours, and this fucking thing just went off. And it's after it's already gone off when it was plugged in. I summon every bit of my strength to get out of that bed, run across the room, see where it's at, turn on the light, and I go to unplug it. It's already unplugged. I have zero explanation for what's going on, so I threw it out of the room.
And that is bizarre because I'm sure that somebody who knows more about electronics could make the argument that there was some kind of a component in there that was holding a charge. But it would be very weird for it to hold a charge for like hours and hours and hours and hours.
And I wish I could say that was the only time. It happened a couple times, to the point where I would make a check before I go to bed to make sure it wasn't in my room. Because I used to not sleep well at all. I would only be able to go to sleep with the TV on. So every single night I'm falling asleep with the TV on. And I sleep through the night pretty well. Some sleep paralysis here and there. But, you know, we learned to work with that. I actually learned how to like lucid dream to stop that. So that fucking thing goes off in my room that night. I freak out, throw it out of the room, immediately go back to my bed and do the thing you do as a kid where you're like, I'm in my bed, I'm covered, monster can't get me. It takes me like an hour and a half just to get to sleep, and it's nightmares all night. Flash forward to like high school. We have forgotten about this fucking strobe light. It's moved from like milk crate where we used to just stash all of our random garbage, from like milk crate to like closets, crawl spaces. It eventually ends up back in my room, and it ticks off at like 2 a.m. again, wakes me up, and I'm thinking, someone's playing a prank on me. You know, it's been like a year since an incident, so maybe someone's goofing. I'm a little bit older. I like to think I'm a little bit more manly, but I'm a sensitive little guy. So my mind immediately tries to soothe itself, saying Curtis must have plugged this in and left, just as a goof or something, or Justin or someone. I go ahead, turn on the light. That son of a bitch is unplugged. Green film over the front of it. It just flashes at like 2 a.m. again. It wakes me up.
The odd thing about this one is that, like you said, it had been stuffed into closets and stuffed into boxes and moved around and hadn't been out or plugged in a very long time. So that already kind of tosses the theory that maybe it's holding a charge somehow.
Either way, I just remember multiple nights of that thing flashing, waking me up, middle of the night, and having like mild panic attacks because of it.
I think we've pretty much got everything that we need. So I guess we'll just end on what's your conclusion? Do you think Peter is turning the strobe light on and off? Do you think this is a ghost of one of the loggers that used to live in the house? Do you think this is a thing that you accidentally manifested? Do you think that we are all insane and we've collectively somehow completely manufactured a false story?
I mean, the most sane part of me says it was an imaginary friend, just information by association got from one person to the next. That's really what it feels like. I had an imaginary friend. I was ashamed of it. You know, friends would bring it up just to kind of poke fun at me a little bit. Nothing malicious, but through osmosis, I think everyone in my inner circle would eventually learn that I had an imaginary friend named Peter. Sleep paralysis is a pretty common phenomenon, and the house is already really creepy. So it wouldn't be hard for someone who's suffering from sleep paralysis to dig deep in their subconscious for something that they may have heard at one point. So for Ryan to have Peter somewhere locked in his subconscious, it really could explain it. But ultimately, with how creepy that house was, the different stories from different people kind of amalgamating into its own phenomenon. I don't not believe in ghosts, but I've never seen, well, based on what you believe about the story, I've never seen a ghost, I don't think. But to sort of conjure a phenomenon seems also plausible, especially considering with faulty or funky electronics triggering like that damn strobe light at random times in the middle of the night, waking me up, much like other people in the house were woken up at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, almost like they're being pestered by something wanting or something unresolved. The most realistic part of me wants to just believe it's an imaginary friend, and through osmosis, everyone kind of learned I had that friend, and sleep paralysis is a hell of a thing that you can dig into your subconscious and conjure something that you don't even know about because it's just so locked away. But then again, you never know.
Welcome to the discussion portion. First, I'm going to tell my experience that I had in this house so that people aren't screaming into their phones and computers and iPads and various other devices for me to tell the story. So, mine is significantly less dramatic than these other ones, but in a way that almost kind of makes it like more like believable and more real. As I'm sure you put together listening to this was kind of like the hangout house. This was where all of our friends, like I feel like every group of friends has the one house where everybody always is. And for us, that was this house. So it was one of these weekends where we were all there, and I was still asleep in not the room where most of this story takes place, but the one on the other end of the hallway. So with this story, we can officially confirm that all 3 of the upstairs rooms had stuff going on. So I was sleeping in there, and I had slept in, and everybody else was awake and like playing video games or doing stuff in the other room. And I sleep with my head under the pillow all the time because I'm a freak. So it was probably heinously late. It was probably like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was still asleep because we would just stay up all night and sleep all day all the time when I was younger. I wake up, I hear everybody in the other room. I kind of get up and look around, and I just put my head back under the pillow and start going back to sleep. And something fully picks up the pillow all the way off of my head and drops it back down onto me. And I just like instantly was fully wide awake and got up and just went into the other room and was like looking around and talking to everybody. And there's absolutely no way that anybody was in the room. And there's absolutely no way that anybody could have like come through the door. Because first of all, I got up and looked around and then like immediately started going back to sleep. So it's not like I was trying to go to sleep for like 10 minutes and somebody snuck in. 2, that house was old as hell and insanely creaky, and there's no way that you could make it down. Like, I wish that you had experience with this house before it got sold, because I'm telling you, like, it is like cartoon haunted house creaky. Like, there is no possible way anybody could have made it through the hallway and then opened the door without me hearing it, and definitely not in the time frame. So there was absolutely no way that anybody else was in the room. The only thing that I could think of trying to like debunk it was the house did have a rat problem for a long time, and the rats would come out and mess with stuff. So the only thing that I could think of that makes any rational sense, like a rat came out and like tugged on the pillow, but they never came out during the day. And also it wasn't just like moved or pulled. It was picked all the way up off of my head and dropped back onto my head.
That's what I was going to say. I don't think a rat's going to deadlift a pillow.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's the only reasonable explanation that I can think of, and it doesn't make any sense at all. So you actually know pretty much everybody involved in the story, with the exception of Ryan, is the only one that you haven't met. So what do you think? You know Curtis isn't a completely delusional liar.
No, I know that none of these guys would like over dramatize, or I mean, they're going to be honest about it, about what happened.
So the first thing that we have to go into on this one is just, again, for the, 1000th time, we have the exact same haunted house tropes that are in every single story you ever hear like this. Curtis's first story happens, his first time hanging out at the house. So he's like a new person coming into the house. Then later, his stuff happens right when he moves in, and then at the end of his time there, it starts getting worse right when everybody's moving out. So there's this trope that these sort of house hauntings always get worse when new people move in and right around when you're moving out. That happens all the time. If you go all the way back to the first episode with the Monica house haunting, exact same stuff. And even Ryan's stuff happens as he is like a new guy moving in and living in the house for the summer. It's like almost annoying to even talk about it, how common it is. Another thing about this one that I wanted to get in here, and I don't think I've actually brought this up on any other episodes because I keep forgetting to do it, but it's in so many of the stories that we've covered so far, which is this idea of paranormal apathy, which is, if you listen to a lot of stories like this, and if you listen to a lot of people tell their various stories, there is always this thing that happens where people experience something paranormal and then just kind of like either say, oh, well, whatever, and just kind of forget about it, or there seems to be kind of a defense mechanism where everybody just kind of like drops it and stops thinking about it. Like with Ryan telling Michael the story and then them both getting freaked out and just kind of being like, okay, and just like letting it go away. Or the overarching theme with this story where we have at least 5 or 6 people that all had stuff happening to them in the house, and then nobody ever really talked about it or put it together until years later, because there's this tendency that people have after they experience stuff to just like not really want to talk about it, and you hear that all the time. There's also the opposite reaction where people get insanely addicted to trying to like experience something again, which is also something that we've talked about, and I think I might have access to an interview for season 2 that goes into that one a little bit more too. And then another thing that kind of freaks me out about this one was when Michael's talking about interacting with the imaginary friend, he talks about remembering it as like vibes-based non-communication. Now there's like 2 ways that you can interpret this. If we're going to go with the narrative that this literally was just an imaginary friend and this whole thing is some sort of wild inside folk legend that we've all constructed over the years, and it really was just an imaginary friend, than it's like, okay, that's just a kid having like just making shit up, like just going like operating off of like purely the vibe. But also we have had multiple interviews with people where they talk about, oh, I just like all of a sudden got a feeling like I understood this information. Oh, I just got this like emotional information beamed directly into my brain. So this is episode 10. So we heard about this in episode 3, where Amira is like, I sort of summoned the spirit of my grandpa, and I had this non-verbal emotional exchange of information. We talked about this in the Birkenhead interview, where Neve talks about how once he sees the Phantom, all of a sudden all of the rules for the encounter are just like automatically projected into his brain. We talked about it in episode 7. The Birkenhead episode is episode 6, by the way. We talked about it again in episode 7 with Rob's religious experience, where he kind of gets these emotional feelings like directly input into his head. And then we talk about it again in episode 9, where, and I'm blanking on the name of the person that was in that interview, unfortunately, but episode 9 was the before life memories. And in that one, he talks about how the conversation that he was having with the being before he was born wasn't in any language that he knew, almost implying that it was like a direct thought transfer. And if that's what we're talking about here, that lines up exactly with this idealist theory that a lot of these ghosts and cryptids and UFOs and stuff that people are seeing are some sort of a consciousness that is sort of above us on the ladder and can make these direct communications into our brain. And you can imagine all sorts of consequences from that. If something can like directly, because we have to imagine that this is like a cascading system. So if the original mind is at the top and all of like the laws of physics and the base reality and stuff come down from that, and humans are not, I don't want to say at the bottom, but humans are disassociated from that in some sort of like a parallel direction where we are experiencing all of this other stuff as a solid physical reality, even though it's in a mind. We can imagine that there might be something in between where we're at and where the top thing is. And since it is in between us, it has access to our thoughts directly in the same way that the higher mind would. We're like a part of it. So if that's the case, you could imagine any number of sounds, images, smells, all the stuff that we've talked about getting projected directly into your brain and then essentially hallucinated as being real. And my argument is these aren't hallucinations, because if you're seeing something, then it is real, because that's all reality is. Like you have no real way to determine what's real and what isn't. This would also explain that old trope of like, well, there was a ghost there and we tried to like get it on camera, or we tried to take a picture of it and it just like doesn't show up in the picture. And people have been doing all these ghost hunting shows and all this like spirit photography basically since the invention of both types of cameras. And it's just nothing convincing has ever happened. It's like dust clouds and orbs. Every once there's maybe like a couple dozen famous ghost pictures that people argue about. But of course you're not going to get a picture of it or a video of it if it isn't a separate part of the world, but is a thought or a conscious pattern that is being projected directly into your brain from something that is sitting at a different vantage point than we are. And I think that is much more likely to be the case with a lot of this stuff rather than somebody being dead. Okay, Olivia, do you have any closing thoughts on this one? Are you a big fan of Peter, or what's the deal with that?
I'm a big fan of Peter. I'm a big fan of imaginary friends in general, I think. I just think it's neat that humans do that. I had one. Michael's wrong, nothing to be ashamed of.
It is weird that is kind of like a universal behavior that almost all kids will do.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even really seem like it hinges on whether or not they have access to other kids. I feel like they'll just do it anyway.
Yeah.
Which is very weird. And again, if you want to go into crank territory, the argument could be made that when you are a kid, your brain is still developing. You don't have context for a lot of this stuff. And maybe your brain isn't fully developed and isn't fully able to filter out all of the stuff that it wants to filter. And it could be the case that a lot of these kids are seeing stuff and experiencing a slightly broader range of reality than you do when you're an adult, which has been a trope that has existed basically forever. Like, even if you go all the way back to like old Germanic and old like Irish and just broadly European folklore, who are like the biggest targets of the Fae? It's kids. Now, you could make the argument like, yeah, that's because those stories were intended to scare kids, to keep them from going into the swamps and drowning, which there's probably some truth to that, but it just seems odd that young kids seem to be focal points for this stuff. And I don't think it's the case that they're targeted by it, or even the case that, because a lot of people, a lot of like new age type people like to make the argument like, oh, they haven't been like indoctrinated into the Dr. Fauci reality that we live in, so they can still see the spirits. I think it's the brain just isn't done cooking yet.
It's just mushy.
And it's letting more of base reality in than an adult brain does. And that's why with adults, it seems like it takes all of this effort of years of practicing meditation, years of practicing like remote viewing, and all this other stuff, or alternatively, extremely powerful psychedelic drugs to rattle your brain around and get it to start perceiving more of the reality around you. All right, just want to wrap up the end of this podcast real quick. Don't have much to add. I don't think we are going to solve the mystery of Peter anytime soon. That house was built in the 1930s. Even if I was to go back into the property records and find somebody named Peter who owned it, or went back and found out that one of the loggers was named Peter and died there, or something like that you might expect from a traditional haunting story, a lot of people are named Peter. Does that really solve the problem? I don't think so. If you have a story that you would like to share on the podcast, please email us at deep.weird@gmail.com. We are always looking for new submissions. If you want to follow us online, we are on Twitter at deepweirdpod, and there's also an active Discord community that you can join. The links to that will probably be on Twitter. They'll probably be in the description of the podcast. And if you go to my old YouTube channel, probably Jacob, they'll be in the description of pretty much all of those videos. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you can. That is a great help to the project. If you would like to support us more directly, you can head over to the Deep Weird Patreon and make a very small contribution there. Deep Weird is written and produced by me, Jacob Pittman, and the music that you have heard tonight was produced by Griffin Dodefray. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.